The silence of the night hung heavy over the eastern border of Burkina Faso. Rain washed over the earth in torrential sheets, and in the whisper of the wind, the distant echoes of old gunfire still seemed to linger like ghosts of conflicts past. Along the edge of an ancient regional highway, a black 4x4 Jeep lay half-tilted in the rain-soaked darkness. One of its tires had sunk deep into a muddy crater, the windshield shattered into a spiderweb of cracks, and inside, a common man lay slumped against the seat in semi-consciousness. But this was no ordinary man. This was Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso. At this moment, however, he was dressed in civilian clothes, his identity carefully concealed, on a covert mission that had gone catastrophically wrong. Enemies had ambushed him with ruthless precision, and he had barely escaped with his life. Wounded and bleeding, he had managed to drive until his vehicle finally surrendered to the elements, coming to rest at the roadside like a dying beast taking its last breaths. Blood trickled from his forehead in dark rivulets, mixing with the rain that seeped through the broken windshield. With each passing moment, his breathing grew more labored, more shallow. Death was creeping closer with the patience of a hunter who knows his prey cannot escape. Meanwhile, not far from this scene of desperation, near an abandoned cattle shed, a 12-year-old boy named Musa was collecting empty bottles and discarded metal scraps. This was how he survived, selling these worthless items to buy bread for his younger sister. His rain-soaked clothes clung to his thin frame, his torn sandals barely held together, and the heavy sack slung over his shoulder represented the entirety of his earthly possessions and his means of survival. Suddenly, his eyes caught sight of the overturned Jeep across the road. The vehicle's headlights were flickering, dying, like the last gasps of a fading life. Musa stopped dead in his tracks, his heart beginning to pound. Orphaned children were often beaten or accused of theft when they approached valuable items. They learned early to keep their distance from trouble. But something about the vehicle drew him closer. Perhaps it was the way it sat there, broken and vulnerable, or perhaps it was something deeper, a call that he couldn't explain or resist. Holding his breath, Musa approached cautiously. The Jeep's door was jammed. He pulled at it repeatedly, his small hands struggling with the weight and resistance. Finally, with a violent jerk, the door flew open, and Ibrahim Traoré's blood-covered body slumped sideways onto the seat. Musa didn't scream. He didn't run for help. Instead, he bent down, carefully sliding his hands under the man's shoulders, and began to slowly drag him out of the vehicle. The man who weighed 3 times more than the boy now became a burden of life resting on those fragile young shoulders. Drenched in rain, blood, and mud, Musa dragged the unconscious president to the nearby abandoned cattle shed where he sometimes took shelter. There, with nothing but an old mat, a torn blanket, and the damp air for company, Musa laid Ibrahim down as gently as he could. He rushed back out into the rain, filled an empty bottle with fresh rainwater, and returned to clean the stranger's face. His small hands trembled as he worked, wiping away the blood with tender care. "Uncle, don't fall asleep. If you sleep, you'll die," Musa whispered in a quavering voice, fighting back his own fear. Ibrahim's eyes flickered open slightly. Through the haze of pain and semi-consciousness, he saw a dark-skinned child whose eyes held more compassion than fear. "Who are you?" Ibrahim managed to ask in a weak voice. "I'm Musa. I collect garbage. But today, I won't let you die." That small boy who himself battled hunger and the elements every day had just become the last hope for a great man. He had no idea that the person he was saving would one day change his destiny and the destinies of thousands of children like him. Outside, the rain began to ease. But inside that cattle shed, a lamp of humanity had been lit. In Musa's form, an angel had descended to earth. Ibrahim Traoré's breathing was heavy and labored. The blood on his forehead had begun to congeal, his lips were parched and cracked, and his body was growing cold. Musa sat beside him, with trembling hands splashing water on the man's face and occasionally patting his cheeks to keep him conscious. "Uncle, don't sleep. You have to stay alive. I'm here with you. Don't be afraid." Musa's voice carried both innocence and desperation, but also a strange courage that seemed far beyond his years. Ibrahim tried to open his eyes. His breathing came in irregular gasps, and Musa's voice echoed in his ears like distant bells ringing through fog. My father used to say that whoever does something for others, Allah stays with them. You must have done something for someone. That's why I'm here for you today, Musa said, as if trying to reassure himself as much as the dying man. He paused for a moment, then continued softly, You know, Uncle, if I had a home, I could sleep comfortably even in the rain. But when it rains, I always look for a place where the roof leaks the least. A spark of light appeared in Ibrahim's tear-filled eyes. This man who had built great buildings in his life, who had stayed in five-star hotels, now lay on the ground under a leaking roof beside a poor child. And for the first time, he truly understood what home really meant. What are you doing here at this time of night? Ibrahim gathered his strength to ask. I was collecting garbage, Uncle. More bottles are found at night. When I earn enough money, I buy bread for my sister. She's in an orphanage. I ran away from there. I just pray that one day I can take her away with me. Musa's eyes held an incomplete dream, floating like mist. Ibrahim looked away, overcome with emotion. He realized that this man who had won worldly deals, treaties, and ambitions was now losing to a child who had no guarantee of dreams fulfilled, no protective shadow of security. Yet this child lived for someone else. I've lost everything too, Musa. Ibrahim's voice grew quieter. Home, friends, respect. Now only my life remains, and even that is in your hands. Musa looked up in surprise. How can someone like you lose everything? You have a vehicle, clothes? Ibrahim smiled faintly. I had all that. Now I have nothing. I was on a mission. Enemies surrounded me. I escaped, but I was injured. My people don't know where I am. By morning, they would probably only find my corpse, if you weren't here. Tears welled up in Musa's eyes. He didn't fully understand the truth of what he was hearing, but one thing became clear to him. This man who had once been something great was now as alone as Musa himself. Don't worry, Uncle. I'm here. By morning, I'll do something, anything. Just don't fall asleep. I'll keep talking to you. And so Musa began telling stories. Sometimes about mischief at the orphanage, sometimes about other children who collected garbage, sometimes about his sister's smile, sometimes about clever ways to shelter from the rain. Ibrahim's eyelids kept drooping, but every story, every sentence, kept him tethered to life. Outside, the raindrops grew lighter. Inside, two strangers, a president and an orphaned child, had grown close to each other's hearts. That night, not only was a life saved, but a new relationship was born. A bond that would later become the hope of an entire nation. The night-long rain had filled the ground with mud. Distant mist floated in ribbons over the road, and the sounds of birds heralded a new beginning in the air. Inside the old cattle shed, Musa sat wrapped in a tattered blanket beside Ibrahim. His eyes held sleep, but more than sleep, they held worry. Ibrahim's breathing had become somewhat steadier, but the wound on his forehead still oozed. Musa had cleaned the blood several times with old cloth, given him water to drink, and kept him awake with conversation so he wouldn't slip into unconsciousness. Suddenly, the sound of a car horn came from the distance. Musa looked up toward the door with a start. A few moments later, an ambulance and a police vehicle stopped on the nearby road. Musa rushed outside and waved his hands frantically, shouting, Here! Over here! There's an injured man here! Police officers and medical staff wearing gloves immediately rushed over. Musa gestured for them to follow him inside the shed. Where is the patient? A nurse asked urgently. Here inside. I stayed awake all night and saved Uncle, Musa said, his voice carrying both pride and exhaustion. The nurse and paramedics quickly entered. When they saw Ibrahim, surprise and seriousness spread across their faces simultaneously. Their expert hands immediately began providing medical assistance. They checked his pulse, cleaned his wounds, and fitted an oxygen mask over his face. One paramedic looked at Musa. His wet face, trembling hands, and the bloodstains on his clothes told a silent story that needed no words. You really stayed up all night? The nurse asked in disbelief. Musa nodded. If he had fallen asleep, he would have died. I kept him awake with talking. Ibrahim opened his eyes in semi-consciousness. He saw Musa through the haze and said weakly, "You saved me, son. You're an angel." Musa grabbed his hand and smiled. "Nothing will happen now, Uncle. The doctors are here." The ambulance crew placed him on a stretcher and began carrying him out. But Ibrahim's gaze remained fixed on Musa. At the doorway, he made a weak gesture with his hand, as if wanting to say something more. Musa immediately came closer. "Yes, Uncle?" Ibrahim gently touched his hand. "Don't disappear. Don't vanish. I will find you." Musa couldn't speak, just nodded his head. The ambulance drove away slowly, and Musa stood there watching. The old sack on his shoulders, his feet covered in mud, and a strange ache in his heart. "He'll probably forget me. All rich people eventually forget us," Musa said to himself, and slowly began walking down the road. Today, too, there was garbage to collect. Today, too, there was hunger to satisfy. But in some corner of his heart lived the feeling that perhaps this man was truly different. At the central hospital in the city, Ibrahim was admitted to emergency care. The blood flow was stopped, his wounds were bandaged, and he was given mild sedation. The doctor wrote in his report, "Severe exhaustion, blood loss, head trauma, but stable." It was a miracle he had survived at all. When Ibrahim regained full consciousness, there was no one he knew around him. All his contacts had been severed. His mobile phone was destroyed, his guards were missing, his team hadn't been informed of his location. One face kept appearing before his eyes repeatedly, those dark eyes, that trembling voice, and that innocent child, Musa. "I have to find him," Ibrahim vowed in his heart, "because I am now in his debt." In the white rooms of the hospital, time seemed frozen. 2 days had passed, but Musa's voice still echoed in Ibrahim's ears. "I kept talking so you wouldn't fall asleep." The doctors had told him he was critically wounded. But as soon as he regained consciousness, the first question he asked was any information taken about the child who brought me from the shed? The nurse shook her head. "He was just a small, dirty boy. No name was asked, no address was left. He said something and left." Ibrahim closed his eyes. That child had not only become his protector, but had also left behind a dream whose weight Ibrahim was beginning to feel on his own shoulders. Meanwhile, Musa was back on the streets as usual that morning. After yesterday's rain, there were more plastic bottles in the drains, which could fetch him 200 to 300 francs. His sack was half full, and his hands still bore the sting of sharp tin cans. As he passed in front of a shop, a voice called from inside, "Hey, dirty child!" "Get away from here. You stink." Musa lowered his eyes. His fingers, which had cleaned Ibrahim's wounds, were now considered unclean in people's sight. He didn't respond, just sat down silently near the gutter. In his mind, moments played out when he had lifted Ibrahim onto his shoulders. Would he come back? Would he forget me like everyone else? But in some corner of his heart, hope still lived. If he made a promise before leaving, then perhaps, just perhaps, he was different. At the hospital, Ibrahim had become able to walk with the support of a walking stick. But he didn't go straight back to his mansion. He wore an old coat, donned simple clothes, and refused his advisor's suggestions to announce his return. "Until I find that child, I don't want to return as president. I want to exist as a man in debt," he declared. He chose the old highway, the same one where the accident had occurred. He inquired everywhere, every scrap dealer, every tea vendor, every street beggar. He asked everyone the same question. "Does a dark-skinned, thin boy come here? Old sack, empty bottles, a bandage on his left foot?" Often people denied seeing him. Some laughed. But then a woman who sold rice on the footpath said, "Yes, that boy comes here. He collects scraps. Sometimes he sleeps behind the cattle shed." Ibrahim's steps quickened. As he approached the shed, he saw Musa, a thin boy, head bowed, holding an empty bottle, and despite his dirty clothes, there was a sparkle in his eyes. Ibrahim stopped, watching him for a few moments. Then he called softly, "Musa!" The boy looked up with a start. It took a few moments to recognize him. Then his eyes widened. Surprise, joy, and doubt emerged simultaneously. "You?" Musa's voice trembled. "Yes, son. I came back to find you." Ibrahim slowly approached him. Musa looked away. "You actually remembered me?" "People usually forget us." Ibrahim placed his hand on his shoulder and said gently, "I am in your debt. You saved my life, and now I will save your dreams." This was the moment when the foundation of a revolution was laid. Ibrahim hadn't just come to fulfill a promise. He had made a decision. This child wasn't just one child. He was a mirror for the entire nation. Ibrahim Traoré took Musa's hand and seated him in a white car beside him. Musa's eyes held wonder and disbelief. Despite being in simple clothes, he had realized that this was no ordinary man. This was the person whose life he had saved from slipping away. The car stopped in front of an old orphanage. "Why have we come here?" Musa asked. Ibrahim smiled at him. "Your sister has been looking for you." Musa's breath caught. He immediately opened the door, rushed outside, and ran inside. A moment later, a small girl came running down the hall stairs, in torn clothes but with the light of hope in her eyes. As soon as she saw Musa, she ran crying into his arms. "Brother!" Musa hugged her too, tears streaming down both their faces. "After Mother died, I thought you were taken from me too," the girl said. "They picked me up from the street and brought me here, but there was no trace of you. I prayed every day that you would come back." Standing at the doorway, Ibrahim watched this scene, moisture in his eyes, determination in his heart. The orphanage director provided a report. "Sir, this child was very weak when she arrived here, but she's intelligent. She's very advanced in her studies. We hope that she can go abroad on a scholarship in the future. But facilities here are limited." Ibrahim closed the file. "This girl is now my responsibility." Then he looked at Musa. "And this child," the director said with some hesitation. "This child is very stubborn, but he has spirit. With proper guidance, he could become a great person one day." Ibrahim thought to himself. This child is already a great person. A week later, a photograph went viral throughout Burkina Faso. President Ibrahim Traoré, in the most ordinary of clothes, standing with a garbage-collecting child, both their smiles hiding an untold story. But people were astonished. "What is the president doing with children? Who is this child?" Official statements remained silent. But on social media, the public embraced this image wholeheartedly. Thousands of comments, millions of prayers. During this time, Ibrahim enrolled Musa and his sister in a pilot scholarship program designed for poor children. But this wasn't just the story of two children. This was the beginning of a new era. The program was named the Angel Program. And on the first day, Ibrahim himself gave the address. "There was a time when a child saved me and carried me on his shoulders. Today, I want all of us together to lift these children up so that tomorrow they can lift up the entire nation." On stage stood Musa and his sister, and below sat thousands of children holding books in their hands and light in their eyes, listening. That day, the atmosphere of Burkina Faso changed. The president hadn't just given support to children, he had given a message to the nation. Our real strength isn't gold or land. Our real strength is children like Musa, whose hands may be covered with calluses, but whose hearts are like angels. President Ibrahim Traoré's Angel Program was progressing successfully. Throughout the country, ambitious steps were being taken to provide quality education, clean water, and nutritious food in schools and orphanages. Musa and his sister had also been transferred to a safe educational center in the capital, where the best teachers and a supervision system had been established on the president's orders. But where there is light, the forces of darkness also begin to move. In a basement of an old factory in a border area of Burkina Faso, a meeting was in progress. Ragai, a notorious former general who had been dismissed from his post due to President Ibrahim's reforms, was now trying to regain power. Ibrahim has made children his shield. He's playing with emotions. But we know whose hands control the gold mines. Ragai slammed his hand on the table forcefully. A Russian agent smiled and said, "We just need one weak point, and we can bring him down in the public's eyes." Ragai threw a file on the table containing photographs of Musa and his sister. This is his weakness. One night, outside the educational center, Musa sat under a tree with his sister watching the moon. Suddenly, the street light went out. Silence fell. A black vehicle came and stopped. The door opened. Two masked men quickly advanced toward them. "You're Musa? Come with us. The president is calling you." Musa was confused, but his sister immediately stepped back. "You're lying. The president meets us himself. Not like this." There was a commotion. Guards came running, but the kidnappers were fast. They were about to drag Musa into the vehicle when a voice rang out, "Stop!" It was Ibrahim. This time without bodyguards, in simple clothes. His eyes held the same fire that those who fight against injustice for years carry. He picked up an iron rod lying on the footpath and advanced toward the attackers. One attacker fled. The other hesitated, but it was too late. The guards had also arrived. Musa clung to the president. "I thought you might get injured again." Ibrahim placed his hand on his head. "If something happens to children like you, then my staying alive is meaningless." On the other side, when Ragai received the news that Musa had been saved, he struck the wall with his hand and shouted, "Now this is a real war!" Ibrahim. And he prepared his final plan, an explosion that would occur on the opening day of the Angel program, where thousands of children, revolutionary leaders, and the president himself would be present. The next day, Ibrahim told his team, "We won't wait for the enemy's attack. We have to stop him where he hides and strikes, in the shadows that suppress the people's truth." Before the morning light, President Ibrahim Traoré put on his old military uniform. No shiny badges, convoys, or protocol, just a simple radio, battery-operated GPS, and with him was Musa, who became part of the mission at Ibrahim's insistence. General Siba had strongly opposed. "Mr. President, this is a child, already a target of the enemy. By taking him along, you're inviting another danger." Ibrahim calmly replied, "This child is now our lamp. Sometimes to defeat darkness, you have to walk carrying the lamp yourself." In the northern border area of Burkina Faso was an old ruin-like research center that enemies had begun using for weapons and covert activities. It remained hidden from satellites because its roof had been designed to look like palm groves. Ibrahim and Musa, along with General Siba's covert team, reached that location on foot. The path was full of thorns, dense bushes, and old landmines. But Musa's sixth sense kept proving useful time and again. At one point, Musa stopped and smelled the ground. "Something is buried here," Ibrahim signaled to dig the ground. Beneath, a freshly laid wire emerged. It was a landmine. When they reached near the base, Musa peeked through a window and saw a face among Ragay's companions that seemed familiar. "This is the same person who got my father arrested. He framed him in a gold theft case." Ibrahim was shocked. "Are you saying this with certainty?" Musa nodded. "Before dying, my father told me his name, Carmo." Carmo, who was now Ragay's advisor, had actually been involved in a national bank gold theft years ago. This was the same banking scandal that Ibrahim had worked on at the beginning of his presidency. But the evidence hadn't been complete. Now a child had emerged as a witness to that scandal. The plan changed. It became necessary to capture them before the explosion. That night, when the guards had become drowsy, Ibrahim and the team raided the place. Crossfire began immediately. The explosion countdown clock had already been activated. Ragay tried to flee. Carmo tried to hide behind a closet, but it was too late. Ibrahim called out in a loud voice, "Carmo, you are guilty of sacrificing children. Come forward." Carmo raised his hands. There were only 4 minutes left to defuse the bomb. Musa came forward once again. "My father was an electrician. He told me that if there are 3 wires, the blue one is the most dangerous." Ibrahim trusted Musa's word and cut the blue wire. A hissing sound came, and the timer stopped. The danger had been averted. Ragay and Carmo had been arrested. Musa was no longer just a child. He had become a true protector of the nation. Ibrahim hugged him and said, "You are an angel to me, Musa. You didn't just save my life. You saved the nation's future." After Ragay and Carmo's arrest, Ibrahim Traoré's convoy quietly left the secret base. The captured enemies, their faces bearing the dust of defeat, sat in an old military vehicle. But the most precious passenger in that convoy was Musa, a child who had saved a president's life, prevented a nation from falling, and begun justice in his father's name. Ibrahim sent a brief message about their return in just one sentence. "We are returning, and with us comes the lamp of hope." When this message reached the capital, it spread on social media like wildfire. Who was the lamp of hope? Was the president safe? And most importantly, the news of the arrest of notorious figures like Regay and Carmo became a storm. General Siba arranged for a secret ceremony in the revolutionary field of Waga. Soon it transformed into a public celebration. When the convoy entered the city, thousands of people were present on the streets. Flags in their hands, tears in their eyes, and love in their slogans. Long live the president. Long live Musa. The car stopped. President Traoré opened the door and first helped Musa get down. The child's eyes were wide with wonder. He had never been among so many people before. He bowed his head, but Ibrahim placed his hand on his shoulder. "Musa, from today you are not just my son. This nation considers you its son." While climbing on stage, Musa's feet were trembling. But as soon as he held the microphone, his voice had a truthfulness that doesn't come from training, but from experience. "My father was an honest man, but truth's time comes late. I am only his son, but now I am a soldier for the entire nation. If one child can recognize an enemy hiding in the jungle, then every child can speak the truth. Don't be afraid, speak the truth. As my father used to say, fear ends with truth." Silence fell over the stage. Then rose a sea of applause that wouldn't stop. Ibrahim Traoré took the microphone. His words held pride, emotion, and the declaration of a new covenant. "From today, for every child living in oppression and helplessness, we open a new path. We are starting the Musa Scholarship. Every orphaned child, every child from a backward area whose parents were crushed in the jaws of injustice, will now receive education, receive respect. And we will stand with them through every difficulty. And Musa, I today grant you the title of youngest national ambassador of Burkina Faso." At the end of the ceremony, a woman in worn clothes quietly approached. She was Musa's mother, still alive, but separated. She was crying, but silently, Ibrahim stepped forward and embraced her. This picture filled the front page of every newspaper in Burkina Faso. The president, a mother, and a child. The new Burkina Faso. But Ibrahim knew the war wasn't over yet. People like Carmo and Regay were just faces. Behind them was hidden an international network, illegal gold trade, arms smuggling, and a conspiracy to enslave backward Africa. During Carmo's search, a secret bag was found. It contained no cash or weapons, but a laptop, some satellite images, and copies of certain international agreements that were never presented in Parliament. General Siba placed that laptop before the president. Ibrahim opened it, and within moments his eyes hardened. "This is a complete inventory of our country's gold reserves. These files contain coordinates of all our reserves, even annual production data. At the end of the files was written a code word, Operation Desert Chain." At that very moment, Musa entered the room. He wanted to say something to the president, but seeing the restlessness in Ibrahim's eyes, he stopped. "Has another war started?" Musa asked quietly. Ibrahim looked at him. A slight smile on his lips, but sparks in his eyes. "Yes, Musa. This time the war is hidden in our mountains, rivers, and layers of gold. But this time we know their faces." The president called General Siba. "Immediately form a new intelligence unit. Its name will be Unity Force. Their job will be to investigate all international companies that have made legal agreements here over the past 10 years. The general saluted immediately and departed at once. That same night, Burkina Faso received a mysterious message from the UN Secretariat. "Your recent actions violate international agreements. We are taking notice." Ibrahim responded to that message in just one line. "We are only taking back our resources. If truth is a threat, then perhaps lies were the powerful ones all along." Ibrahim kept Musa with him again, but now not just as a son, but as a young leader. Every evening, Musa would sit with the president, read files, listen to plans, and learn. One day, Musa himself asked, "Mr. President, can I ever become like you?" Ibrahim smiled. "You're already stronger than me. You saved me. Now, you are this nation's hope." At the end of the section, A file on the laptop opened, a video that Carmo had apparently made secretly. In it, a French-speaking man, his face blurred, was saying, "When that president is wounded, that moment must be completed. There won't be another chance. Extract the gold later. First, silence the president." Ibrahim stopped the video and said, "This isn't just a conspiracy to murder me. This was an attempt to silence an entire nation. But now we will speak. We will roar, and we will take back our gold." The morning sun rose over Waga's sky with new light. But this day's light wasn't merely the sun's. This was the light bursting forth from a nation's conscience. "When I grow up, I'll also become president," Musa said one day. Ibrahim laughed. "No, son, you won't become president. You will become the voice of millions of children who were never heard." Ibrahim announced in his address to the nation, "We will determine through constitutional law that Burkina Faso's gold, oil, uranium, and land will remain only in national hands. No foreign company under any banner will have access until approval is given through public referendum." Processions were held throughout the country. Slogans were chanted, posters were made. "Resources are our right. We don't want gold, we want freedom. Musa, your dream, our revolution." When everything had changed, Ibrahim presented a gift to Musa. Not a sword, badge, or certificate, but a book. "This is for you, Musa. Gold can finish. Land can be taken. But knowledge is a power that never ends. You saved me. Now knowledge will save you." Musa kissed the book and said, "Mr. President, if you ever fall again, I will come again. Ibrahim Traoré promised the nation once more. Whoever tried to bring us down, we learned from them the art of rising higher. Now we will not only stand, but will lift others too. This wasn't just a war for resources. This was the beginning of our awakening." 5 years had passed since that fateful night when a 12-year-old boy saved the life of a president. Burkina Faso had transformed in ways few could have imagined. The Angel program had spread across the entire nation. Over 50,000 children had received scholarships. Orphanages had been rebuilt with modern facilities. Schools in the most remote villages now had qualified teachers, solar panels, and libraries filled with books. Musa, now 17, stood on the same stage where he had once trembled with nervousness. But this time he wasn't a frightened child. He was a confident young man. The first graduate of the prestigious National Academy that President Traoré had established. His sister sat in the front row, now a medical student, her eyes shining with pride. Their mother sat beside her, no longer wearing worn clothes but dressed with dignity, working as a supervisor in one of the new orphanages. President Ibrahim Traoré watched from the side of the stage, older now, with more gray in his hair, but his eyes still held that same fire, the fire of a man who had refused to let his nation be plundered, who had bet everything on the children who were once considered worthless. Today, Musa began his speech, his voice steady and clear. "I stand here not because I was special, but because someone believed I could be. 5 years ago, I was collecting garbage in the rain. I had nothing, no home, no hope, no future. But I had something that no one could take from me. I had humanity in my heart. When I found President Traoré bleeding in that overturned Jeep, I didn't think about what I would gain. I didn't think about reward or recognition. I only thought, this is a human being and he needs help. That simple truth changed everything. But here's what I want every child in Burkina Faso to understand. I didn't save the president that night. We saved each other. He was dying from his wounds, and I was dying from poverty and hopelessness. In that cattle shed, in the rain, we both found life again, not just surviving, but truly living." The audience sat in absolute silence, hanging on every word. The president gave me education, gave me opportunity, gave me hope. But he gave the same to thousands of others, not because we deserved it, but because he believed every child deserves a chance. Every child deserves to dream. Every child has the right to become something greater than their circumstances. Today, Burkina Faso is different. Our gold stays in our hands. Our resources build our schools, not foreign mansions. Our children learn to read and write, not just to survive. And this, all of this, happened because one man refused to give up. and one child refused to walk away from someone in need. So I say to every young person listening, you are not defined by where you sleep, what you eat, or what clothes you wear. You are defined by what you do when no one is watching, when there's no reward, when it's just you and your conscience. That night in the rain, I had a choice, walk away or help. I chose to help. And that choice changed a nation. Musa paused, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found President Traoré. Mr. President, you once told me I was your angel. But the truth is, we are all angels to each other when we choose compassion over indifference, when we choose action over fear. You taught me that the greatest power isn't in weapons or wealth, it's in the decision to stand up, even when you're the smallest person in the room. The applause that followed was thunderous. But Ibrahim Traoré remained still, tears streaming down his face openly. This was his legacy, not the policies he'd implemented or the enemies he'd defeated, but this young man standing tall, speaking truth with the confidence of someone who knew his worth. But Musa's speech had resonated far beyond Burkina Faso. Video clips spread across social media, translated into dozens of languages. International news networks picked up the story. From garbage collector to national hero, the boy who saved a president and changed a nation. This attention brought both praise and scrutiny. Western powers that had lost access to Burkina Faso's resources watched with increasing concern. They had dismissed Ibrahim Traoré's reforms as temporary populism. But 5 years later, the model was working. Other African nations were watching closely, asking questions about their own resource agreements. In a conference room in Paris, a group of corporate executives and government officials convened an emergency meeting. The Traoré model is spreading, one executive said, tapping a folder marked Confidential. Mali is reconsidering its mining contracts. Niger is asking questions. If this continues, we lose access to $40 billion in annual extractions across the Sahel region. What about the UN pressure? Another asked. Ineffective. Traoré has positioned everything as sovereignty and children's welfare. Any action against him makes us look like we're opposing education for orphans. It's brilliant politics, a French diplomat leaned forward. Then we change the narrative. We don't attack the children's programs, we question the finances. Where is all this money coming from? Suggest corruption, mismanagement. Plant stories about Swiss bank accounts. Will it work? It doesn't have to be true. It just has to create doubt. Within weeks, articles began appearing in international media. Questions raised about Burkina Faso's resource management. Traoré's Angel Program, noble goals or money laundering scheme? Former associates claim presidential corruption. The articles were carefully crafted. No direct accusations, just implications and anonymous sources. They were picked up by wire services and reprinted across Africa. In Ouaga, Ibrahim read these reports with General Siba and Musa. The young man, now serving as youth ambassador, was furious. This is lies. We have transparent accounting. Every franc is documented. How can they? Musa, Ibrahim interrupted gently. They don't care about truth. They care about control. We took away their gold, so they're trying to take away our credibility. What do? Ibrahim smiled, that same calm smile he'd worn in the cattle shed 5 years ago when death seemed certain. We do what we've always done. We tell the truth loudly and clearly, and we invite the world to see for themselves. President Traoré made an unprecedented announcement. Burkina Faso would undergo a complete financial audit by an independent international team, but with one condition. The team must include representatives chosen by African nations, not just Western powers. And all findings would be made public with no redactions. We have nothing to hide, Ibrahim declared in a televised address. Unlike those who have extracted wealth from Africa for centuries while hiding their accounting behind corporate veils, we will show every ledger, every contract, every transaction. Let the world judge who is corrupt. The challenge was brilliant. Refusing it would confirm suspicions of a smear campaign. Accepting it risked exposing the very inequities in international resource extraction that Western powers wanted to keep hidden. After tense negotiations, a compromise was reached. A 15-person audit team was formed. 5 from African Union nations, 5 from Western nations, and 5 from neutral countries like Switzerland, Singapore, and Brazil. For 3 months, the audit team combed through every aspect of Burkina Faso's finances. They visited schools, interviewed teachers and students, examined contracts, tracked gold from mine to refinery to sale. Moussa served as one of their youth consultants, showing them the reality on the ground. He took them to the cattle shed where he'd saved the president, now preserved as a national monument. He introduced them to his sister and hundreds of other scholarship recipients. He showed them the transparent digital system that tracked every scholarship payment. One auditor, a skeptical economist from Germany, initially came looking for irregularities. By the second month, she told her colleagues, "I came here expecting to find creative accounting and embezzlement. Instead, I'm seeing the most transparent resource management system I've encountered in 20 years of auditing." Another auditor from Kenya went further. The question isn't whether Burkina Faso is corrupt. The question is why this model is so threatening to certain international interests. And I think we all know the answer. When the audit team's final report was released, it sent shockwaves through the international community. Not only was Burkina Faso exonerated of all corruption allegations, but the report included a devastating comparison section. The auditors had done something unexpected. They'd compared the percentage of resource revenue invested in public welfare in Burkina Faso versus the percentages in countries with traditional international contracts. The findings were damning. Burkina Faso, under Traoré's reforms, 73% of resource revenue invested in education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Nations with traditional extraction contracts, average of 12% of resource revenue remaining in the country, with most going to foreign corporations and corrupt intermediaries. The so-called Traoré model, the report concluded, represents a significant advancement in equitable resource management. Rather than questioning its legitimacy, the international community should study it as a potential framework for sustainable development. The report became a sensation. It was downloaded millions of times, translated into dozens of languages, and cited by activists and economists worldwide. As the international drama unfolded, Moussa's personal journey continued. At 18, he was accepted to multiple universities, including prestigious institutions in Europe and America. Everyone expected him to leave Burkina Faso to seek opportunity abroad. Instead, he enrolled in the new National University of Ouaga, established with resource revenues that once would have enriched foreign shareholders. "Why stay?" a journalist asked him during an interview. Moussa smiled. "My whole life, people told me I had to leave to succeed. That real education, real opportunity, real value existed somewhere else, in Paris, in London, in New York. But that's the old thinking that kept us poor. I'm staying because I believe in the new Burkina Faso. I'm staying because if all the best students leave, who will build our nation?" His decision inspired hundreds of other students to make the same choice. The brain drain that had plagued African nations for generations began to reverse. Young people who once dreamed of escaping now dreamed of building. At university, Moussa studied international relations and economics. He wrote papers analyzing resource extraction contracts across Africa, documenting the systematic exploitation. His work was sharp, well-researched, and damning. But he also studied at President Traoré's side, learning the practical art of governance. He attended cabinet meetings, participated in policy discussions, and learned that changing a nation required more than passion. It required patience, strategy, and unwavering commitment to principles even when convenient compromises beckoned. Success brought new dangers. As Burkina Faso's model threatened to spread, those with vested interests in the old system grew desperate. Intelligence services intercepted communications about a planned assassination, not of President Traoré this time, but of Moussa. The logic was brutal. The president was now too high profile to kill without international outcry. But Moussa, while beloved in Burkina Faso, was less protected. His death could be framed as random violence, gang activity, anything but what it truly was. When Ibrahim learned of the plot, he immediately increased Moussa's security. But Moussa resisted. "If I hide behind guards, how am I different from the rulers we replaced?" he argued. They lived in mansions while people starved. I won't live in a fortress while students walk freely. Musa, this isn't about pride. They want to kill you. They wanted to kill you too, 5 years ago. You didn't stop working. Neither will I. It was a tense argument, but finally they compromised. Musa would accept security, but it would be discreet. Plainclothes officers, not an intimidating convoy. The plot was ultimately foiled when one of the would-be assassins had a crisis of conscience. He was a young man, not much older than Musa, recruited with promises of money. But after watching videos of Musa's speeches, seeing images of the Angel program, he couldn't go through with it. He turned himself in, providing evidence that traced the conspiracy to a French private military company with ties to mining corporations. President Traoré could have handled this quietly through diplomatic channels. Instead, he held a press conference and released everything: the intercepted communications, the confession, the financial trails leading to foreign corporations. They tried to kill me, and I survived, Ibrahim said, his voice steady but filled with controlled rage. They tried to kill Musa and he survived. But how many other African leaders have they succeeded against? How many coups have they orchestrated? How many wars have they funded? How much blood has been spilled so that shareholders in Paris and London could see quarterly returns on gold and uranium they never touched with their own hands? The press conference went viral. African Union leaders, who had mostly watched Traoré's reforms with cautious interest, now faced public pressure to take stronger stances. Student movements erupted across the continent with a unified message: our resources, our future. The French government denied any involvement, claiming the military contractor had acted independently. Few believed them. Amid the political turmoil, Musa's personal life found unexpected joy. During his university years, he'd befriended a young woman named Amina, a medical student whose own story echoed his. She'd lost her parents to a preventable disease, survived through the Angel program, and devoted herself to ensuring others wouldn't suffer as she had. They shared dreams of a better Burkina Faso, spent long nights discussing policy and philosophy, and gradually fell in love. Not the dramatic passion of movies, but the steady, deep love built on shared values and mutual respect. When Musa asked President Traoré for his blessing to marry, Ibrahim's eyes filled with tears. Musa, you've never needed my permission for anything. You're your own man. But since you're asking, yes, with all my heart. Amina is remarkable. You two will build something beautiful together. The wedding was simple but meaningful, held in the renovated orphanage where Amina had grown up, attended by hundreds of students and families whose lives had been changed by the Angel program. No expensive venue, no elaborate ceremony, just community and love. President Traoré gave a toast that became legendary. 5 years ago, I was dying in the rain, and this young man saved me. Today, I watch him build a life of purpose and meaning. They say I changed his life, but the truth is simpler and more profound. We changed each other's lives. And in doing so, we started changing a nation. That's what I wish for you, Musa and Amina. Change each other for the better, and through that love, change the world around you. A year later, Musa and Amina welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Zara, meaning flower and brightness. President Traoré held the baby at the naming ceremony, his hands trembling slightly with age and emotion. This child, he said softly, will never know the Burkina Faso you and I knew. Musa. She'll never collect garbage in the rain. She'll never wonder if she'll eat tomorrow. She'll grow up with opportunities we couldn't imagine. That's progress. That's victory. But he also added a warning. She'll also face new challenges. The old enemies, poverty, exploitation, corruption, we're defeating them. But new challenges will come. Complacency, forgetting why we fought. Thinking the battle is won when it must be won again with each generation. Your job and hers someday is to remember. Remember where we came from. Remember what we fought for. Remember that freedom isn't inherited. It's earned and protected. By Musa's 23rd birthday, President Traoré was 75 years old. The decades of military service, the stress of governance, the wounds from the assassination attempt, all had taken their toll. His doctors advised him to step down, to rest, to let younger leaders take the burden. He refused. "I'll rest when the work is done," he said stubbornly. But even Ibrahim Traoré couldn't defy time forever. One evening, during a cabinet meeting, he collapsed. The stroke wasn't massive, but it was serious enough. He survived, but his right side was weakened, his speech slightly slurred. From his hospital bed, he called for Musa. "It's time," Ibrahim said simply. "Time for what?" "For you to lead. I'm not dying. Not yet, God willing, but I can't do this anymore. The nation needs strength, energy, vision. It needs you. I'm not ready. I'm 23 years old. I was younger than that when I first became a soldier fighting for this country. You've been preparing your whole life, Musa. You're more ready than you think." What happened next was unprecedented in African politics, a genuinely peaceful, voluntary transition of power. President Traoré announced he would not seek another term and endorsed Musa as his successor. Many expected chaos. Older politicians resentful of a young upstart, tribal divisions, regional conflicts. Instead, something remarkable happened. The various factions, seeing Musa's genuine popularity and understanding that he represented continuity of the successful reforms, united behind him. The election was the freest and fairest in Burkina Faso's history, monitored by international observers who found virtually no irregularities. Musa won with 68% of the vote. On Inauguration Day, Musa stood on the same stage where he'd given his first terrified speech 8 years earlier. Now he was president, but he hadn't forgotten who he'd been. "I was born in poverty," he began his inaugural address. "I grew up collecting garbage. I slept in the rain and went hungry more nights than I can count. Nothing about my birth suggested I would stand here today, but I had advantages that had nothing to do with wealth or status. I had a father who taught me that truth matters, even when it costs you everything. I had a sister who gave me someone to fight for. I had a mentor." His voice caught with emotion as he looked at Ibrahim Traoré in the front row, who saw value in a garbage-collecting child when the world saw only trash. "And I had a nation that decided, finally, that its children mattered more than foreign profits, that its resources belonged to its people. That poverty wasn't destiny. I stand here not as an exception, but as a promise that what happened to me can happen to every child in Burkina Faso. That's my commitment to you. That's the Burkina Faso we will continue building together." Musa's presidency began smoothly, but the first major crisis came within months. A severe drought threatened food security across the Sahel region. International aid agencies offered assistance, but with conditions. They wanted Burkina Faso to accept certain economic reforms, to open markets to foreign agricultural corporations, to weaken protections on local farmers. It was the old playbook. Use crisis to force policy changes that couldn't be achieved through honest negotiation. Musa faced a difficult choice: reject the aid and risk famine, or accept conditions that would undermine everything the Traoré revolution had achieved. He chose a third path, using the resource revenues that previous generations would have seen stolen by foreign companies. Burkina Faso purchased food on the open market and distributed it through the Angel Program infrastructure. They also accelerated irrigation projects using their own funds and engineers. It wasn't easy. Reserves were depleted. The program stretched to its limits. But they survived without compromising sovereignty. The aid agencies were furious. "Unsustainable," they declared. "Fiscally irresponsible." Musa responded in a televised address. "They call it irresponsible to feed our people with our own resources. They call it sustainable to depend on foreign charity with strings attached. I ask you, citizens of Burkina Faso, which truly makes sense? Over the next decade, Musa's leadership validated Ibrahim's faith in him. He expanded the education system, built hospitals, invested in sustainable agriculture. But more than any specific policy, he maintained the principle that had guided Ibrahim Traoré: the nation's resources belonged to the nation's people. Other African nations continued to follow suit. Ghana renegotiated its mining contracts. Tanzania took greater control of its natural gas. Zambia restructured its copper agreements. The trend was clear. Africa was waking up. Global corporations fought back through international courts, through diplomatic pressure, through propaganda campaigns. But the genie was out of the bottle. A generation was coming of age that didn't accept exploitation as inevitable. Ibrahim Traoré lived to see much of this, though his health continued to decline. He spent his final years writing, documenting the revolution for future historians, and enjoying his surrogate grandson, Musa's daughter Zara, who called him Grandfather Ibrahim. When Ibrahim finally passed away at age 83, the entire nation mourned. His funeral was attended by leaders from 50 African nations, by former garbage collectors who'd become teachers, by orphans who'd become doctors. But the most moving eulogy came from Musa. Many will remember him as president. As military leader, as revolutionary, Musa said, standing beside Ibrahim's casket. I remember him as the man who could have died in the rain, but was saved by a child he didn't know. I remember him as the man who kept his promise to find me. I remember him as the man who believed that a garbage collector could be a leader. But most of all, I remember him as the man who taught me that the greatest strength isn't in never falling. It's in who helps you up and who you help up in turn. He fell, I helped him rise, and together we helped a nation rise. That's his legacy. Not any single policy or program, but the simple revolutionary idea that we are all responsible for each other. That the president and the garbage collector are both human beings deserving of dignity. That we rise together or we don't rise at all. 20 years after that rainy night, Burkina Faso had become unrecognizable from the country Musa had grown up in. Life expectancy had increased by 15 years. Literacy rates had climbed above 85%. The economy, built on equitable resource management, was stable and growing, but perhaps more importantly, the next generation didn't remember the old ways. For them, it was simply normal that children went to school, that orphans were cared for, that resources benefited citizens. They didn't realize how revolutionary this was because it was all they'd ever known. That was exactly as it should be, Musa thought. Revolution succeeds when it stops being revolutionary and becomes simply the way things are. On the 20th anniversary of the night he'd saved Ibrahim Traoré, Musa returned to the old cattle shed. It had been preserved as a museum, but today it was closed to tourists. He wanted to visit alone. He stood in the small space where he'd kept Ibrahim alive through the night. The torn blanket was still there, preserved behind glass. The exact spot where they'd lain marked with a simple plaque. His daughter Zara, now 19 and studying engineering, had come with him. Is this really where it all started? She asked, looking around the humble space. Yes, Musa said quietly. Right here. A dying president and a garbage-collecting child. Neither of us knowing that this night would change everything. What were you thinking that night? Musa considered the question. Honestly? I wasn't thinking about changing the nation or starting a revolution. I was thinking, here's a human being who needs help, and I'm the only one here. What choice do I have but to try? Zara smiled. That's what you always say, that you didn't do anything special. I didn't. That's the point. Compassion isn't special, it should be normal. Helping someone in need shouldn't be heroic. It should be automatic. We made a revolution by simply treating people like human beings. That's not complicated or heroic. It's basic decency. But most people don't do it. Then most people should, Musa said simply. That's what I hope your generation understands. You don't need to be exceptional to make a difference. You just need to act when action is needed. You just need to care when caring is called for. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Zara asked, Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd walked past that night? If you'd been too scared or too tired to help? Musa closed his eyes, imagining that alternate history. All the time. Ibrahim Traoré would have died in that jeep. Someone else, probably someone worse, would have become president. The resources would still be flowing out of the country. Children would still be collecting garbage with no hope of anything better. Everything would be different. One decision changed all that. One decision made in the rain by a scared 12-year-old boy. Musa confirmed. That's what I want people to understand. History doesn't just happen to us. We make it. Every small choice, every act of kindness or cruelty, every moment we decide to help or walk away, all of it matters. As they left the museum, the sun was setting over Ouaga, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. In the streets below, children played safely. Students hurried home from school with books under their arms. Families walked together without fear. It was ordinary. It was beautiful. It was everything Musa and Ibrahim had fought for. A nation where everyday happiness was possible, where children dreamed of futures instead of merely surviving presents. That night, Musa began writing. Not policy papers or speeches, but his memoirs, his attempt to capture what those years had truly been like, to preserve the memory for generations who would never know the old Burkina Faso. He titled the manuscript simply, "The Cattle Shed: How One Night Changed a Nation." It began with these words: "They call me a hero, but I was just a child who couldn't walk away from someone who needed help. They call it a revolution, but we just tried to treat people with dignity. They say we changed Burkina Faso, but really, we just stopped letting others steal from us and started believing we deserved better." This is the story of that change. Not the official history you'll read in textbooks, but the truth as I lived it. Cold, scared, uncertain, but determined to try. Because that's all any of us can do. Try. Try to be better. Try to help. Try to leave the world a little better than we found it. It started in the rain in an abandoned cattle shed, with a dying president and a garbage-collecting orphan. And from there, we built something beautiful. The end author's note: this story is inspired by real events and the spirit of African liberation movements. Though it is a work of fiction, it is dedicated to every child who has had to be stronger than any child should need to be, and to every leader who has chosen justice over convenience.